Any state wants to control your finances. And not without reason. Many countries will give you a residence card just to make you a tax resident of that country. Watch this video until the end, and you will learn how to determine your tax residency, what questions to ask when moving to another country, what limited and unlimited tax liability are, how you can accidentally, without even knowing it, become a tax evader who doesn't file annual reports and avoids paying taxes, and how. This can ruin your tax reputation and either greatly help you during an interrogation with a tax inspector, MIDZI, or completely undermine all your statements. Friends, I have in my hands an excerpt from the law obowiązkowy on PIT in Poland regarding tax residency, including a reference to this interpretation with a bunch of useful examples, directly from the podatki.gov.pl website, that is, from the government, so to speak. You can see the official interpretation on our Telegram channel. The link to the Telegram channel will be in the description of this video. And now, let's actually figure out what tax residency is in Poland. As in most other countries, there are two tax residency statuses: full tax liability and limited tax liability. Full or limited tax liability depends on whether you are a tax resident of that country, how the state determines it, and how you can determine for yourself whether you are a tax resident of a particular country. Let's talk, for example, about Poland, where there is one simple criterion. That is, if you stay in the country for more than 183 days a year, and this time does not have to be consecutive. Yes, simply 183 days in a calendar year. If you stay, then you are a tax resident of that country. If not, there is a second criterion, very generalized, very slippery, which needs to be considered individually for each specific person. It is referred to as the place of residence, meaning the place of living. That is, there may be a situation where you live in the country for less than 180 days. Maybe you came to this country for just a month. Or perhaps you visited 3 times a year to see your relatives, but you will still be considered a tax resident of this country. Why? Let's figure it out. So, in Poland, the place of residence implies the following criteria. Either you have a center of life interest in this country, or you have a center of economic interest in this country. What does this mean? Well, economic interests are quite clear. This is either work or business, in general, a source of income in this country. Besides this, it's also your property. That is, roughly speaking, if it's unclear, under all other conditions, which country's tax resident you are. But in Poland, for example, if you have real estate, if you have a car registered in Poland, other assets, then they will consider this criterion, all else being equal. That is where your property is located. With the center of life interests, meaning the center of personal life interest, the situation is more complex. And there are a whole bunch of criteria for how the state can interpret this. They primarily look at where you reside, that is, whether you have a registration or a residence agreement, meaning where you actually live. That is, if you have an agreement in this country, it adds to considering you a tax resident of this country. Secondly, where your family is located. That is, there might be a situation where, for example, you work in Germany, but your family is in Poland. Accordingly, you come here to Poland to visit your family, and the system may interpret you as a tax resident of Poland because your family is here accordingly. Your interests are always to return to Poland to your family. Also, if all of this is unclear, if none of this exists, the center of your cultural interest is also considered. That is, roughly speaking, if you attend clubs here, go to the cinema, I don't know, have a gym membership. In this country, all else being equal, this will be a criterion for considering you a tax resident of this country. If this is difficult to determine, even your friends are taken into account, meaning where your friends and acquaintances are located. In other words, to summarize, in order to be considered a tax resident of a particular country, you need to either live in that country for 183 days or prove that you have a center of vital interests in that country. Now, how can you verify this 100%? In your situation, if this is a tricky situation, if you have, I don't know, a business in Ukraine, a business in Poland, if you live 180 days in Italy, 180 days in Poland, and then a few more days in another country. How to understand? How to know for sure that at the end of the year or the next year, you won't get hit with something, a fine for not paying taxes, not filing a tax return. Friends, only the tax authorities can answer this question for you with 100% certainty. Unfortunately, here in Poland, there is an official procedure, that is a tax ruling interpretation, tax interpretation. When you or your accountant can write them a request, describe your situation, that I am such and such living. In Poland, for such and such time, I have a housing contract, no contract, and so on. Describe your situation, pay some state fee. And they should help you sort out this situation, say, yes, we consider you a tax resident of this country. Who does this concern? This concerns everyone who in some way earns or resides in Poland. Yes, because the state wants all your income taxes to belong to it, specifically more. Yes, it will fight to consider you a tax resident of its side, so that if necessary, they can impose additional obligations on you, and since we have figured out how to determine tax residency. Now let's deal with limited and unlimited tax liability, tax responsibility. If you are a tax resident of this country, then you have full tax liability. This means that you need to file a tax return in Poland. Well, using Poland as an example, yes, you need to file an annual tax declaration in this country about all your income, both in Poland and abroad. That is, roughly speaking, you work in Poland, you go to work in Italy, plus you trade stocks in America, plus you have, I don't know, a business somewhere else, a website, a project. All these incomes need to be reported in your annual financial statement. And you might ask, what about taxes if I've already paid taxes in that country? Most countries have agreements in place to prevent this double taxation. This means that if you have paid taxes in that country, and you will indeed pay them in the country where you earned that money, then here in Poland, you still need to declare how much you earned and possibly pay the difference if the tax you paid there is less than the tax here. But even if you paid more there than the tax here, such as income tax, the state still wants to know how much you earned abroad. Why? Because in Poland there is what is called a tax scale, skala podatkowa. And accordingly, if you earned in Poland, for example, the first threshold of the tax scale is 120,000 zlotys. If you earned about 100,000 zlotys in Poland and think, great, I'll pay a 12% income tax, and abroad you earned another 200,000 zlotys, and we know that in Poland, if you are a subscriber to our channel, if not yet, be sure to do so. We know that in Poland, if you earn more than 120,000 zlotys, then you pay not 12% income tax on the amount above, but 32% income tax. So the state wants to understand how much you have earned in total to determine if they need to move you up the tax scale and collect from you. In this case, not 12%, but 32% tax. So we have considered unlimited tax liability. And limited tax liability is when you are not a tax resident of this country. In such a case, you simply pay taxes on the income you earned in this country and report all your profits in the country where you are a tax resident. At the end of this point, I will say that we friends have good news. Finally, we received a clear answer from the lawyers to a very popular question. If I have a business, for example, in Ukraine, private entrepreneurship in Ukraine and private entrepreneurship in Poland, I am Ukrainian myself, so of which country am I a tax resident? And do I need to pay taxes twice? Do I need to declare my income from Ukrainian entrepreneurship in Poland? We have this answer. Of course, we will share it with our clients during consultations. How to get there? The link will be in the description of this video. And we continue. So, when deciding to move to another country, what question should you ask the residents or the tax authorities of that country? What are your criteria for tax residency? Most likely, they will be the same. Yes, and what? Taxes. That is, what is the tax scale in your country on income? On the income I earned within the country, on the income I earned in other countries, and in other countries, this is a very important life hack. And we move on to the next point. This is what entrepreneurs do to ease their tax burden. Tax consultants charge a lot of money for consultations and schemes, which say different things. Again, I'll give an example. This is not tax advice. Yes, it's just an example of what I've heard. Guys, registering a business in Poland, also register a company in America. In a state where data protection allows not disclosing who the beneficiaries are. The companies themselves become tax residents of Portugal because Portugal has zero tax on foreign income, for investment income from abroad. Furthermore, being a tax resident of Portugal, they invoice the Polish company from the American firm to transfer the money there. And from the American firm, they then transfer this money as dividends for example, to the Portuguese, the entrepreneur owner, thereby having zero taxes in the cycle. This is one example of sophisticated schemes that when you hear about them, just blow your mind. But in this whole story, it's very easy to get burned on this. Because we are in the 21st century, not without reason, the government wants to take away our cash. It wants to switch us to card payments. If previously there was a problem in many countries with paying by card, now in some countries like Poland, I am also starting to encounter this. There is a problem paying with cash. They say no, only by card, only pay by card. This is not by chance. The government wants to remove our cash because everything that goes through non-cash transactions can be tracked. And you can very nicely explain that you are a tax resident of Portugal, that your center of life interest is there, your friends are there, cultural events are there, but you are paying with your card at a store in Żabka in Poland. By the way, there is a video about Żabka on our channel. Here's a hint now. You are paying in Poland, leaving a digital trace, and then it will be very easy for the tax authorities to determine where you actually hang out and where you spend your time. And this same point, this same life hack, your digital trace, can save you if you were indeed in another country. Because what have we encountered with our clients while helping them undergo audits? Yes, for example, I had an experience when I was interrogated regarding a company by the border service. And they said, we see that on paper, the person entered Poland, meaning yes, he crossed the European border into Poland, and he was here for a year. Where are his documents? Where are his reports? And so on. That's it. And this person says, no, I wasn't in Poland. I was, for example, in Belgium. Well, for instance, yes, I was in Belgium. But how to prove it? The person crossed the border with Poland, right? It's very simple to prove. We collected all the payment receipts for each month that the person made in that country, yes. And it was clear that every month, every week, the person was just shopping in stores and had some transactions specifically in that country. Thus, the bank statements showed that the person was physically there because he spent money there with his card, he paid with his card there. And this saved him from large fines, from major sanctions. Accordingly, such a thing can greatly help you in a difficult situation or sink you. Your entire beautiful story. And now the most interesting point. How can you, without knowing it, yourself, become a tax evader in this country? I will give an example based on Poland, and I really encountered this after living here for 9 years. I faced this for the first time, and it could have been a problem. This is a letter from one of my friends. He showed it to me and said, Vitalik, what should I do with this? In short, there are several pages of text, a tax declaration. But if you condense this whole fable, it says that you made a profit of 0.45 zlotys. From this money, we withheld 9 groszy in tax. We also reported to the tax authorities that you earned money, thus in Poland. Accordingly, you are obliged. If you are a tax resident of Poland, you are required to file a tax declaration that is about your income in Poland. The person did not know about this. The person did not earn this money. It just so happened that he has a regular deposit account, and the bank itself credited him with interest, some kind of bonus for holding this money. Thus, it is considered his financial income, and therefore he is obliged, to pay tax on this income if he is a tax resident of Poland, then include it in his tax declaration. Otherwise, the bank has already sent this information to the state, and they will know about it anyway. The person will already be considered a tax evader, yes, already at fault. Without knowing it, summarizing this whole story, you have the opportunity to choose tax residency in the country where it is more advantageous for you to pay taxes. Secondly, this is verified by 2 criteria, either by the country, where you reside for more than 183 days, or where your center of life interests is. Thirdly, if you decide to manipulate or somehow change your tax residency while leaving informational traces, whether in the form of payment receipts or signed contracts, believe me, this story is very easy to track. Even in Ukraine, a law was passed on the exchange of banking information with the European Union, so you can't hide those incomes there either. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a like, write a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If I can help you in developing your business, help you open and etc., in Poland, help you open a company from scratch in Poland, or if you need a paid professional consultation, below the video there are all the necessary links to submit your application. Either I or a manager will contact you. I will be glad to see you, wishing you a successful business. In Poland,